KI4DCR. This is KI4CFS, and I want to talk about what you've learned listening to the scanner and what's going on in Western North Carolina, because you monitored it both through ham radio and the scanner of how the entire system collapsed. And thanks to ham operators, there's communication going on.
Yeah, the ham operators were one of the main things that were left when the storm cleared, and during the storm, when the storm was still going on, the repeaters, except for maybe one, were still operational. HF, of course, was completely operational. And one other thing I wanted to mention that people probably don't think about was the landline telephones survived better than about anything else did, because they're mostly underground, and in a lot of situations they would have still been usable where cell phones and other forms of communication were not.
Wow, that's incredible. They went from cell phone towers that were just completely wiped out, and then their emergency service that people don't realize is more advanced.
Some of the Viper towers went down, and the bigger problem was the Viper system for the towers that remained was overloaded. So they had so many people on a system. It was kind of like the old Nextel. If too many people were talking and you hit the button and you'd get a busy signal and it wouldn't connect. Same with DMR. If you get on a system and there's too much going on or someone else is talking and you try to get in, it'll just give you a solid tone. And that's what they had. They had several tower sites that were compromised, and therefore the traffic went to other towers in the area, and those towers got overwhelmed. But I will say the Viper system performed well, because between it, they were able to route traffic to parts of the state like Onslow County, Martin County, places at the beach, all up down the coast, to other 911 centers through fiber optic networks, where telecommunicators in, say, Wilmington were getting calls from the people in Ashe County and Buncombe County and places like that. So in that aspect, the Viper system and the whole telecommunications network proved to work well. The problems were that the local stuff was all gone. So people had no way. This one guy had a house that caught fire and no one knew it. And someone had to drive to a fire station and alert them, because they had no way that they would have known that there was a fire. It was too far away to be seen, but someone actually drove to the station and said, "Hey, look, this house 2 miles up the road is on fire."
Wow. Yeah.
But in the 60s and 70s, we all had landline phones, and landline phones and pay phones were a lot tougher and less fragile network than cell phones.
Yeah, and I interviewed Randy in Statesville on his landline.
Oh, yeah.
I remember when I visited him, he's another amateur operator. And I said, "Is that a landline you had?" He said, "Yeah, it's still more reliable, so I keep it around." Well, that helped, because he was able to do that, talk on that to people, and then get on his amateur radio and connect to, I think, Mount Mitchell repeater system.
You may remember in 2003 when we had that ice storm, and I had a generator at my house, and I had a landline phone and DSL internet. And I was one of the few people in Raleigh that had internet, because I had kept that old landline and DSL, and it worked through the biggest ice storm we've seen here in years.
Yeah, so, and of course ham radio was helping. That's when I was...
Oh, yeah, ham radio was a huge help, because people were stranded all over the Triangle area and couldn't get anywhere, didn't know what was going on. But the old RARS repeater and the 8.8 and all jars and all them were just singing along.
Yeah, I was contacted Barbara and told her, "Hey, don't get in your car on the radio," because I said, if you can't reach on the cell phone, turn on the ham radio. And she got in the car and turned it on, and we were able to say, "Hey, watch out, stay away from this." So,
and about everybody that had a license was on during that, because we all learned that you couldn't go uphill, and we were stranded at Crabtree. We learned that everything from Crabtree is uphill to get away from Crabtree. But through ham radio, we learned a lot about where things were going on, what roads not to go on, all that. It was extremely helpful. And it would have been here if that storm had come here. I think we would have had enough ham radio operations. And the thing that made it treacherous more so in the mountains is they had already gotten 3 to 5 inches of rain a day before, and the amount of rain triggered the soil to just collapse.
Yeah.
and there's so many hills and everything's on a hill, whereas here that wouldn't have happened. You would have just had a big flood and we would have probably been all right, other than, the normal places would have flooded. But that's just an area that's not geographically susceptible to that kind of rainfall.
It's an ongoing tragedy. I just think this is another wake up call to the value of amateur radio, both for individuals for their own well being.
As well as GMRS, General Mobile Radio
That's
Service,
right.
which you can pay your $35 and get on the air immediately and use that without having to take a test. So between the two, absolutely. And you can get a GMRS repeater and set it up with a small tower and have a working system in just a few minutes. A repeater for that is not that expensive, and they're very easy to set up.
What were some of the other things you've heard on the emergency services? Because you've been monitoring it, but also I'm now monitoring the HF. I'm going to get a recording of that so people can hear that long wave. The people with longer distance communication, for those that aren't familiar with it, and
On the
then
Hurricane Net and the Tar
yep,
Heel Emergency Net. Yep.
that's it. I've got
And that performed admirably. That has not missed a beat during the whole thing,
yep.
because there are people up in the mountains that still had like charged radios or generator or any other power, and you could quickly charge any kind of ham radio with a generator in just a few minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And you could also operate a 50-watt rig, I would think, off a generator with no problem.
Mm-hmm.
So as long as you had an antenna and a generator, and a lot of people did have generators up there. But the things I heard on the radio were horrible. They started Friday morning about 10 a.m. with one whole subdivision in Burnsville, North Carolina. They said 8 homes had collapsed and had floated downriver, and people were actually on top of the homes as they fell down the river. We heard a man, his wife, and a 10-month-old baby were on top of a long RV, and it had broke out of the RV park and was going down the river, and they were on top trying to hold on. This were some of the very preliminary things that happened Friday around noonish. And from then it got worse and worse as time went on. Everything from bodies being in people's front yards to entire homes washing away, vehicles washing away, people trying to swim out of homes. One lady was in a home and the ceiling collapsed and she was pinned. And the problem was there was no way to respond to these calls because there was no aircraft. The weather was too bad for those to fly, and the roads were gone to get to these people. So unless you had a boat or a raft or something like that, and people around here in Raleigh remember all the floods we've had. But what you don't realize here, think about if Wake Forest Road was under 16 feet of water, or if Six Forks Road was under 16 feet of water. That's what was going on in the mountains. We had a video of a hospital, and the only thing visible was the word emergency over the emergency department at the top of the building. And everyone was on the roof. This was in eastern Tennessee on the Tennessee-North Carolina border. And they ended up having Black Hawk helicopters from Richmond National Guard and other areas to come and get these people off the roof.
And the thing with even helicopters is they have to have a stable platform to land on.
Exactly. And a lot of the pavement and parking areas and places like that were gone. They were underwater. The one thing I did not understand why they did not send some helicopters from the Coast Guard up there, because they weren't really busy on the coast doing much. There's no storms on the coast right now on the east coast of North Carolina and Virginia. Whereas when we had Hurricane Floyd in September of '99 across eastern North Carolina, we had multiple helicopters from the Coast Guard that came and rescued people because they fly in that type of weather. They could have flown in that hurricane type weather with no problem because they're used to it.
It's such an ongoing tragedy. That's why we want to get more attention on it. And then the other thing is people are now ready to help and trying to find out. They have to be careful because if they go there, they don't have gasoline. It's casualty in stores. I just
even WRAL could not get gas for their truck until they got back way away from the mountains. And that's another problem. I heard today that they were airlifting. They had a 275,000 gallon tank for water that they were trying to take by helicopter or plane up there and set up for portable water, and then some larger gas tanks that they were trying to portable gas tanks, as well as diesel, because they've got every kind of equipment you can think of. And now the National Guard has flown some pretty large planes that are capable of cargo, hauling vehicles and other things that have landed in Asheville. But the thing that got me was Friday afternoon and evening, none of the media around Raleigh knew anything about this. So I placed a call to them. I said, you guys know what's going on in the mountains? They were like, well, we've heard there's some flooding. And I said, you have no idea what's going on. And then by Saturday morning, they had crews up there and they were flying drones and other things. But a lot of people around here had no idea this was going on had they not been listening to a statewide, rescue net or something like that until Saturday morning around 10 o'clock is when it started getting its way into the triangle where people knew about it. But we knew about it, I'd say it was around 11 a.m. till about 3 Friday when things were really, and then Friday night, it was just nonstop. Entire homes being washed away, RV parks, people being stranded in vehicles, 18-wheeler trucks stranded, trains. Two guys were on top of a locomotive, and the locomotive was almost underwater. I mean, there was a story today of a guy that hiked 11 miles and across 3 rivers and numerous fallen roads and trees, and he finally reached his parents, and they have no water, no power, no internet, none of that stuff. And I think he was able to take them a backpack full of food and some canteens of water. But it's beyond anything that you or I have lived through in North Carolina. I don't think anyone's ever seen it. It's kind of like a Katrina hit our mountains.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah. So many of those places I've taught at, like, those towns, and it's just tragic.
We've been to West Jefferson. We frequently go to Asheville, Black Mountain, Swannanoa, Cherokee, the casino up there. Cherokee survived a little better than it seemed to be an area, Henderson County, Buncombe, Yancey, Mitchell, and a few, and then right in the corner where Tennessee, Virginia, North Carolina, Unicoi County, Tennessee was where the hospital was that was underwater. Several other counties right on that border. Washington County, Virginia had a lot of problems. But that whole, I'd say about a 16 county area right in the tip of where the 3 states come together was just ground zero for this whole thing. And the problem we're running into now is everybody wants to help, but there's no central way or person or agency to communicate with to find out what to do or how to help. I've called numerous numbers, numerous volunteer organizations, and gotten nothing. Either the phone just goes to a voicemail. There should be some sort of, if nothing else, I think our government should get a central hub put together and say, this is where you can go and divide these people up into whatever category they have resources to give to volunteer. And somebody needs to have a hub for them, because there's Samaritan's Purse, there's the Cajun Navy, but there's probably 10 or 15 of these groups. They're difficult to reach. They're busy. They don't really have the staff to tell the volunteers like me and you what we should do. And the problem is a lot of people are driving up there and they're met with dead end roads or parking lots, and they don't know what to do, where to go, or how to help, because they're not even geographically familiar with the area. I haven't just taken off and gone up there,
Right.
because A, I would have to use a map because there's no GPS, and B, I have no idea of the roads and what the geography and the topography is right now. So I don't know that I would be any good.
Right. Well, what I'll say is, if anyone sees this, we'll get this out in a day, and they know of things, put it in the comments. And
Absolutely, yeah, because that's what we need.
the greatest thing is just hearing how the amateur radios are stepping up and they're helping, and that's why I want to tell people, at least get one of these things, learn how to use it. Like I said with Randy, here's a brand name, and then you can get a cheaper one, and it's just a great thing to learn to have. And then you can buy
you could
a
even
solar
spend
panel to charge them if you want to.
150, $200 and get a nice Motorola or Kenwood or something that's a little more professional grade and program it pretty easily yourself. But yeah, you can start off with one of the radios that's less than $100 and sit right there and program it at your own computer, or some of them you don't even need a computer. But I will say the Mount Mitchell repeater, they linked that to some other repeaters, and they were able, kind of like Viper, to divert resources to other areas. Echolink was another way, and there were ways that amateur radio, DMR, and other digital modes, HF, there were a number of modes that could be used, and they all have been used and are being used now. And I don't think any of them failed. I mean, we lost a couple of ham towers in like West Jefferson and other places, but with Echolink, you don't need a tower. You can get on your phone,
Right.
or
If you have a
whatever else,
connection.
yeah, and connect that way. Because but the problem is up there right now. There's no cell phone, there's no Wi-Fi, there's no nothing. But
Right.
they're setting up some Starlink portable dish networks at main places like fire stations and places like that. So things are getting better, but some of these roads, they say it may be months. We actually had a reservation at a campground for 2 weeks from now, and they said it would be a year before we'd be able to come back up there, and that was near Asheville.
So I want to review some good tips that we've learned already on being prepared for this. One, have cash on hand.
Yes,
Because
absolutely.
look, I
Yep.
just heard one of the towns I know, the Ingalls is open, and it was through the ham radio
Only
announcing
cash.
it.
Yep.
Only cash, only cash. So having some cash and smaller bills, not just
Fill up your
large ones.
vehicles and all your stuff with gas. Generator,
Right.
make sure your generator's working. I have a portable generator that'll run an entire house, including the air conditioning. It'll
Right.
run heat and everything. It won't run like a clothes dryer that's on 220 and stuff like that. But, I had thought about heading up there with the generator to help out. And if my RV wasn't anchored down, I'd do that. But anyway, yeah, having everything full of gas, having everything charged. I mean, they forecasted this storm several days in advance, although not quite as bad as what it was.
Right.
But they did say the mountains were going to take a beating. So that was a heads up for me. Flashlights, iPhones, iPads, whatever you had, charge it. Buy one of these backup power things. Even one of these car battery jump boxes now will power an iPhone for like a whole day and charge it.
Yeah.
So there's all kinds of supplies out there that you can get that'll keep you charged up. That probably the nicer ones would have kept you charged up for 3 or 4 days, and you would have had some form of communication.
And then some extra water, and possibly, if you're comfortable,
Water,
little
yep.
camping water purifiers. You can get some of
Yep.
those and keep it on the
And you can
shelf.
buy MREs now. It's no longer a military thing. Anybody can buy those. So that's another thing. And I was going to say, there's also a trick. If you have no cell phone service and you have an iPhone 14 Pro or above, you can connect and make it a satellite phone. And I was taught that. A guy posted that on YouTube during all this. I haven't had a chance to try it because obviously there's a lot of cell service in Raleigh, but I've had others say that it does work.
Well, I just wanted to get your experience because you're both active in ham radio, but you're also big on monitoring the scanner world and what's going on with it. And I had heard about it.
And I've been in the fire and EMS
Yes.
industry since 1978 with volunteer in Nash County and then volunteer in Eastern Wake County. And we went through Fran, Floyd, numerous tornadoes that came through here in the 80s. And then another set of tornadoes came through, I think it was 2011. So, but this is unparalleled. This is beyond any of that.
So we'll put information we have, and of course, you and I and several others started a Facebook group for ham operators.
Yes.
And they're out there helping each other on Facebook.
And even people that aren't licensed are joining these groups because now they want to help. They want to find out how to get licensed.
Yeah.
What to do both with GMRS and ham also. And it's great. I'll bet just in our two groups, I bet we've had a couple hundred people join since Friday
Yeah,
morning.
and they're realizing maybe I should have this as a backup for the next time too.
Exactly, because I mean, with HF, if you've got an HF receiver and you've got a 12-volt backup battery supply and an antenna, you can talk hundreds of miles, as we know, maybe even across the United States if the conditions are right.
Yeah, you got it.
Back in the 80s, I'll never forget, 1990 or 91, a hurricane hit the Outer Banks, and my ex-wife and I were sitting listening to HF, and everything was carried from Raleigh to the Outer Banks by HF radio. And back then, there were no cell phones. There was no internet in 90. And it worked flawlessly. I mean, we listened to it for 2 days.
The key is understanding how these systems can get overloaded and how more primitive systems can be more stable.
Correct. Because the Viper system, they've admitted many times it did get overloaded. And sometimes they would try to get on the Viper and dispatch a call, and they were getting a busy signal. It was because so many towers were messed up at the time that, and not just Viper towers. We saw one picture, I think it was West Jefferson or Jefferson, where an entire ham radio tower and the building and everything came off the mountain and were down in a valley.
Mm-hmm.
And when you get something like that, we've learned something from this storm. Cell phone service is vulnerable. Internet's vulnerable. Everybody says, oh, there'll always be internet. Well, there's neither one of those things up there now. And there's also major supply chain issues like you're talking about, because the grocery stores that are there can't get supplies in because a lot of the roads going into Asheville are gone. So they don't have any gas. The tankers can't get up there. This is going to be a long-term thing. They're saying it could be in excess of maybe 2 months before all the cell phone service can get back up, and way longer than that before the roads will be repaired.
Yeah, and this, of course, supply chains for all of us does, because a lot of trains
nothing's coming from west
here
of
and
Asheville.
trains being slowed down as well. So
I remember the breaking news I got from a guy in Asheville Friday night. He said your supply chain to the west from Asheville is done, whether it be rail or other than air, whether it be rail or the or by road. He said 40's been compromised in 3 places. I think there was one spot on 40 they could let people go over the mountain, but there's one lane, and they're using that only for emergency vehicles to go east and west, nothing else, because it's not safe for anything else.
Excellent. Well, thanks, Charles, and we'll add resources below in the text, and appreciate you're looking for new ways to help. If anyone else knows ways to help other people in the community, put it in the comments below.
An example was I got an email just a while ago from a lady in Boone that wanted to know if someone could just clean her driveway because she could get out, but she wasn't able to do it. There were 2 decent sized trees across the driveway, and I thought if I was there, I got a couple of saws, this would be a 20-minute job.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I don't want to drive blindly up there, because the problem was I GPSed it. I couldn't even get to where she's at with a highway. It would require miles of walking, but they're using ATVs up there, small boats, kayaks, John boats, stuff like that. So things you wouldn't normally think of have come into real handy. Drones, especially the larger ATVs that sit higher up off the ground, are able to go through water. But there's some stories in there of some people surviving that are just unreal, and you're going to continue to hear this just getting going, unfortunately.
Yep, absolutely. We'll put them below. We'll put some of our resources below, Charles, and then if people have others, just add on to it. But this is part of,
Yep.
I love being part of the amateur radio community, because if a disaster occurs, we can be part of the solution, not just a victim in the system.
And I will add to that getting your entry-level amateur radio license, a technician, I think I studied 2 days, and I passed it and missed like one question. So you can start there and then wait a little bit, take your general, and once you get your general, you can work all these HF bands.
That's it.
If you're really wanting the king of the crop, then get your extra. But their tests are not that hard, and it's well worth it, not just for storms and emergencies, but for the camaraderie that we all experience throughout the rest of the year. It is made a big difference in my life in a spiritual and friendship way that I never had. So it's filled a void in that as well. It's
entirely.
It's all the time.
Well, I'll sign is KI4CFS and
KI4DCR North Raleigh.
73. Thanks, folks.
73.
Take care.